Today, we're going to break down the story of one of the longest and, frankly, most controversial reigns in modern history. We're talking about the iron rule of Robert Mugabe over Zimbabwe, a rule that lasted for nearly 4 decades and completely reshaped a nation.
You know, this right here, this wasn't just some throwaway political slogan. This single, pretty chilling statement from Mugabe himself was the absolute core of his entire career. It was basically a declaration of war on any other possible future for his country.
So that's the big question we're digging into today. How did one man's ambition for a forever rule actually work? What were the methods he used to build it and hold on to it for so long? And, maybe most importantly, what was the devastating cost of that ambition?
Right, so Mugabe's grip on power was no accident, not at all. It was a system, and it was carefully, deliberately constructed for one purpose, and one purpose only: to last forever.
Okay, so let's get into how it was built. You can really think of this iron rule as standing on 3 distinct pillars. First, you have to get absolute control over everything. Second, you use brutal enforcement to make sure nobody can challenge that control. And third, well, the inevitable result of the first 2 was a nation driven to complete collapse.
So that first pillar, authoritarian rule. What does that even mean in plain English? Well, it's about creating a system where all the power, and I mean all of it, flows straight to the top, to one leader, to one party. There are no checks, no balances, and zero accountability to the actual people they're supposed to be governing.
And here's how they made it happen in the real world. The goal was to just erase the line between the ruling party and the state itself. You do that by crushing any real political competition, taking over institutions like the courts and the military, and then just systematically silencing anyone who dares to speak out against you.
But look, getting that kind of total control isn't just about clever political moves. To make it stick, and to make sure people were afraid to even think about challenging it, Mugabe's regime relied on a second, much darker pillar.
And this is the point that you just have to understand. The violence, the intimidation, the brutal crackdowns, none of that was some unfortunate accident or a side effect. No way. It was a deliberate, calculated, and absolutely essential tool. It was how they enforced the forever rule.
This really shows you the 2 different realities people were living in. If you were a loyal supporter, hey, you got rewarded, you got jobs, you got protection, you got a little piece of the power. But if you were an opponent, you faced intimidation, violent persecution, and you were basically cut out of the life of your own country. It was a system of reward and punishment, writ large on a national scale.
Here's the thing, though. A system built on total control and enforced by pure fear, it can't last without a cost. And in Zimbabwe, that cost was absolutely catastrophic. The endless pursuit of political power led directly to that third pillar we talked about, the total collapse of the nation itself.
I mean, just look at this number. 70%. That's the estimated drop in farm output after the government started seizing commercial farms. Now, the policy was sold as fixing old colonial wrongs, but what happened in practice was that these productive farms were often just handed over to political allies who knew nothing about farming. Suddenly, Zimbabwe, a country once called the breadbasket of Africa, couldn't even feed its own people.
And that one decision triggered this awful chain reaction. The whole economy just went into a freefall with insane hyperinflation. Food vanished from the stores. Jobs disappeared overnight. What started as a political crisis had become a full-blown humanitarian disaster, and you can trace it all back to that same iron rule.
So, after all those decades, what's left? What does the forever that Robert Mugabe promised actually look like on the ground today?
This chart really just sums it all up, doesn't it? The pillar of authoritarian rule, the consequence was the total loss of democracy and freedom. The pillar of political violence, the consequence was decades of horrific human rights abuses. And that final pillar, the national collapse, well, the consequence is a broken economy and a population that is still suffering. Each cause has its own clear, tragic effect.
Which really brings us to the final, haunting question. The story of Robert Mugabe's iron rule forces us to ask something that echoes again and again throughout history. When one leader's ambition is to rule forever, who really ends up paying the infinite price for that dream?